Mark chapter 8. Thanks, Dave, for reading that for us. So we've been cruising through Mark. If you are new here, you just need a brief reminder. The book of Mark, it is the shortest of the three things we call the synoptic gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's the shorty in between it. And it's particularly written to a non-Jewish culture, so it has a lot of information in it that really is made for people like a lot of us who aren't Jewish people who need a little bit of help. And so it has all this kind of information designed there to kind of bring us up to speed, not understanding our Jewish culture so much. So in our text today, we've come through a ministry here where Jesus has been ministering publicly all around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, here's my Ohio map. Just visualize this wonder in your head. Okay, here's about to scale. If Columbus was Jerusalem, if you lay a map of Israel right over Ohio, Columbus is Jerusalem. This area of the Sea of Galilee is up by Mansfield. Okay, that's where the Sea of Galilee is. And last week, on the west side of the Sea of Galilee is particularly a Jewish region. And on the east side of Galilee is a Gentile region, a non-Jewish region. The east side is kind of ruled by Herod and those guys. And then last week we got to Tyre and Sidon, and those are basically Upper Sandusky and Toledo. Okay, so last week Jesus was in Toledo, and he had some conversation with the woman right there, and he came back down. Now he's all the way back across over to Mansfield into the Sea of Galilee area, and he's gone all the way to the east coast of it to the Gentiles again. So this whole stretch is from the Gentiles in Toledo to now the Gentiles on the east side of Mansfield. So this is a Gentile section here. And one of the big things that's happening in this passage is there's a strong question of why do we, as European, African, Asian, North American, Antarcticanians, why do we legitimately have a claim to the Jewish promises, the Jewish Messiah, the Jewish religion? Because the Messiah was Jewish. The new covenant that the Messiah brings, that is from the old covenant. It has its Jewish roots. So there's a big question for the readers in Rome and other places of like, why do we have legitimate claim? Especially in a world this time here where the Judaism was kind of spread, a non-believing Judaism was spread throughout the whole world and was attacking the Gentile Christians and making claims of like, that's our stuff, you have no right to it. So there's a big question drawn out in all of these about the legitimacy of it. And in this passage here today, we hit this portion of feeding of the 4,000. So those who've been watching our sermons lately will notice that about a month and a half ago, Jesus was feeding 5,000. There's two different feedings on the beaches. And one is on the west side, that's the Jewish side, and one's on the east side. Matthew and Mark is the only two that mention this whole one in the Gentile section here. And so in the first wave of this, Jesus is demonstrating that provision is not a hard thing for him, right? He's not that caring about bread. He can take care of the bread. And so he has a heart of compassion. He's teaching them. It's his primary move is teaching them and bringing the information of the kingdom to them. His heart is moved to compassion for them. He then commissions servants to care for, provide for that for them. He calls them to look at what they already have to help do the work. And then they lean upon him and he provides dramatically. And then they're even involved in the stewardship of that which is left over. That's on the Jewish side. And then we have this passage 2 chapters later where he's doing it now to the Gentiles. He's doing a one-for-one ministry. It was 5,000 men plus all the women and children over on the west side, the Jewish side. And this one here is a little bit lesser. It's 4,000 men, plus or minus a couple, unless there's an exact count, and I doubt that. So it's 4,000 men plus men and women on the Gentile side. And the exact same thing happens if you look at both accounts. He's teaching. His compassion moves in. He then he commissions his people to take care of it. They say, we can't take care of it. He goes, good answer. He then goes, bah! Miraculously does this. And then he commissions his people to go back in and do cleanup work again. Steward the things that are brought. So it's really this exact parallel thing is happening on the west side, the Jewish side. It's happening on the Gentile side. Because even though last week in our text, we understand that salvation does belong to the Jews. Salvation of all of humanity is funneled through the Jewish nation, because God revealed himself there, made it. Salvation, Messiah, everything, all the covenants, all the promises, all the prophets, everything came out even though it belonged to the Jews, it is now legitimately and fully made available to all of us non-Jewish people out there. You, brothers and sisters, are 100% blood-bought and heirs of the King of Heaven just as much as a Jewish person who needs to be blood-bought and made an heir of the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't have to do with nationality, but there is a legitimate question about the flow of information, the legitimacy. And so this text here has to do with why it's done. He feeds the 4,000 on the east shore to demonstrate that his message and his kingdom is going out just as much to the Gentiles as it has the Jews, though he did serve the Jews first. So it's there to show a contrasting piece. With this said, I don't know. I'm kind of weird. Most of us know that. If you don't know that, we need to have coffee. That'll become apparent, clear after that. So I was sitting there just thinking about it, and there's these numbers in here, these 5,000, these 4,000s, and there's these how many loaves and fish are being presented the first time, which I really appreciated Dempsey mentioning. It's a 2-piece Long John Silver meal, basically, right? That the first event happens, right? This one's a little different. This is like the Aldi selection of loaves, right? There's 7 loaves here and a few smattering of fishes, and you're trying to figure out what's going on here. But I just started thinking, like, what are the actual numbers on this? How big is this? So, okay, I did a little work. This is my math, not yours. If you choose to waste your life and do more of your math, it's totally fine, but I think I got it covered till heaven, okay? Let's just say, because it says here they ate and they were satiated. This is larger just for fun. Okay. It says they ate and were satiated. Let's just say that it takes a softball-sized piece of bread to make you satisfied, right? Let's just say that. Well, roughly speaking, it's probably safe to say there's at least 10 to 15,000 people in this feeding event, because only the guys are counted. So a bunch of them are married and a bunch of kids. So let's just say 10,000 people. If there's 10,000 people, and in the end, Jesus is out of a loaf making 10,000 softball chunk sizes of bread, like how much is that? I don't have a good reckoning for that. So I kind of searched my heart and my mind after 2 days of prayer and fasting. I came to find that probably the best metric I could make that would make sense to your average cross-city person is because it's cubic feet, right? How do you measure cubic feet? The best way a cross-city person can measure cubic feet is a Honda Odyssey. So after doing all the math, if you took the seats out of Honda Odysseys, gutted the thing, basically Jesus, out of 7 loaves, fills 3 Honda Odysseys full of hunks of bread. It's a lot. Okay, now we got to think here, like, because he doesn't exactly say how he's doing it, but like, I was just doing the math. If Jesus has got one of these loaves and he is ripping one at a time, doing this. Let's say you just go with his right hand. That's 2.5 hours, if it's 1 per second, that he's doing this, right? There's a full-on workout going on here. It wasn't like, poof, we got bread, right? And if he was double dipping, double barreling, it was down to 1 hour and 10 minutes, right? If he's just doing this all the time. So that's for free. Okay, that's just free. Right. But sometimes in my mind, I do those things just so I can see the realities of it and not just let it sit in some words in my head. There's just this amazing, astonishing miracle that Jesus does twice, where he takes these loaves of bread and he multiplies them for everybody with excess, a very specified excess that is stewarded in the end. But in the end, this is it. Mark records Jesus' compassion, his commissioning help and provision of the Jews in multiplying the bread and fish. And just 2 chapters later, he does it to the Gentiles to show that God is legitimately bringing us into his family as Gentiles just as much as Jewish people. So that sits there for that purpose. Then we move on to verse 11. Take a look with me at verse 11. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign, a supernatural verification from heaven to test him. So it seems from heaven, meaning it seems that they're demanding something specifically, not healing, something like that, because he's been doing lots of healing. They want something airborne. They want something out of the sky, something Old Testament style, like a pillar of fire, some smoke. They want to see the big stuff from the sky as a testifying to verify that he's really from God, but they've already decided he's not from God, so this is not a question, this is an attack. Verse 12, and he sighs deeply, like he did last week, sighs deeply in his spirit and says, why does this generation, this group, seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. So our first part today is this, that Christ owes no one any additional sign of proof. He owes nobody and no one an additional sign of proof. So let's just start off with the study help. You saw in here that word generation. In our common parlance as English speakers right now, when we hear generation, we think of like Gen Z or boomers, somewhere between that. It's a time stamp. People that are of this age and this old. In the New Testament, generation is not tied to time. Generation is tied to a grouping of people because we know that. This is one of the great examples of it. He says this generation will not receive a sign. He's been doing signs everywhere. We could just kind of go through the list, and someone already mentioned in our book, like the water into wine is literally called a sign. It says he's healing people. Those are called signs. It says later on in John, he did so many signs, they're not even written in this book. Jesus was doing signs everywhere to that time frame generation. So when he's saying this generation will not receive a sign, he's talking about the group of unbelieving Jewish leaders who once again come down to put him to the test, not to ask questions, but to actually to attack him. So just lock that in as you read generations. When you read things like this generation shall not pass until these things happen, just think about it differently. It's not like our timestamp English generations. The problem here with these guys was hardness towards Jesus. They were there to fight. They weren't there to learn. And in all reality, they were the most biblically informed people in the world. They are the scholars. They have access to the scrolls. They have all the training. And so these most biblically informed scholars heard Jesus' message, but they didn't know him. Right now, if you went on Amazon and you look at commentaries, biblical commentaries of books that are basically describing what these books mean in the argumentation, a lot of them are written by people who don't believe Jesus. They're just thinking about it from a scholarly standpoint, just like they would maybe do with the Odyssey or other places in our writings throughout history. They don't actually believe. The difference between these Jewish leaders and them was that these Jewish believers said they did believe. And Jesus later on says, if you believe Moses, if you believe the Old Testament, you'd believe me too. But you don't believe him, otherwise you'd believe me. So they're unbelieving biblical scholars. They weren't saved. They weren't God lovers, even though everyone said they did. And everyone said, well, they're the ones we should cater to. We shouldn't question them and we shouldn't attack them. Hands off them, they would be God's people. And the Pharisees particularly were a group of people that were known to be these scholars of these texts. Rather than trusting Christ, they came to argue with the light of the world and challenge him. But on contrast to that, Jesus being filled with the Spirit is grieved or angered in his heart. And what he does is he refuses their demand for a sign and deems it unnecessarily. So they're demanding it, they're pushing it, they're argumentatively. And Jesus assesses the situation in perfect love and justice and says, you get no sign. The book of Matthew tells us, except for the sign of Jonah, which means you're going to interact, you're going to deal with me resurrecting from the dead, right? The 3-day reversal. So you get no sign, and he leaves them. He doesn't plead with them. He doesn't provide an extra miracle, so maybe they would believe, because the problem wasn't just simply their head, the problem was in their heart, and their hearts were hardened. And Jesus, the Savior, left the shore. And so, I think it's a really interesting thing to consider Jesus. Sometimes we like to think so much about the compassion of Jesus. We like to think that he is just beside himself and would do anything at any time to try to let me do this, let me do this, let me do this. Jesus is looking at the heart. Jesus is communicating very effectively to people. And he did that, and he knew when it was the right time for him to be done. And he had judged that these men were done. They had settled in their heart that they opposed him. And he said, no sign for you. And he got in his boat and left, which is a stunningly sad thing. The biblical scholars of the land, feigning as leaders, have Jesus turning their back on him, and Jesus walks away. So for us in the room, hear this. If you've given yourself to God, if you haven't given yourself to God, and let's say you're in the room and you're thinking this through. Let's say you're online watching this. Let's say, or think about our friends that don't know Jesus yet. If they haven't given themselves to God, and they're still looking at Jesus in the Scriptures. They're still listening and thinking about what he's saying. If that's you or that's them, you may find yourself truly not listening and inquiring, but you might find yourself actively withstanding. taking it in, but finding an excuse away from everything he says. And judging everything he says as, oh, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, that's not authoritatively enough, that's not sure enough. So you may find a difference, and I would caution you to be very careful. There's a strong difference between gazing at Jesus and trying to figure out who he is and not being wrong with that, and judging Jesus. Because some people will sit for years and years and years and years and years and actively listen to the words of Jesus and actively judge him. And that is not an error, that's wicked. So, as a person that doesn't know Jesus, I would encourage you, feel free to ask him to reveal himself to you. Ask him to demonstrate that he is actually there. But I want to warn you something. How he's going to do that. I want you informed that he will do that usually not by the means that we think of in our culture. We think that means, well, then if I ask him to do that, he's going to reveal himself to us and demonstrate he's there. It means that he's going to use one of the real things, right? He's going to let me see something, a sight, a sound, a smell, touch, taste, a good human testimony, maybe a testing device, a little meter, or some human study or poll. Those things really matter, right? And that's how he's going to prove himself to you. But I'd say he doesn't owe those things to you. Sure, he may provide any of those things, but he does not owe those things to you. He will, and he already is effectively demonstrating his legitimacy to you by his words that are entering into your brain and into your heart. They carry true testifying weight. And I know that's scary. I know that's hard in faith, but that's what he's saying he's doing. He is testifying himself through his words, and they're powerful and they're effective. There's a couple of texts in here to consider. Up here on the board here, they said to each other, listen to the words, the testifying words of Christ. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road? So this is later on disciples, after he's raised. It's the Emmaus Road where Jesus is walking with him. He's unfolding this amazing Old Testament expose on who he is. And they're listening. They're not even getting who he is. But at the end, he reveals himself to them. And they're saying to him, did not our hearts even burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? Likewise, in John 12:46-49, if you hang around a church enough, you'll hear me reference this quite a bit because I think it's a very, very helpful principle. John 12:46-49 says this. It's up on the board in case you're looking. I've come into the world as light, so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. Bold statement. I came in as light, so whoever believes in me, not does stuff, not changes, but whoever asks God to forgive them and change them into a God lover, right? Because I died on the cross to forgive sins. Anyone who believes in me may not remain in darkness. If anyone hears my words, which you're doing right now because these are his words, and does not keep them, doesn't hold to them, I don't judge him, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. But you will be judged. The one who rejects me and does not receive my words, holds my words, has a judge. The word that I've spoken to you will judge him on that last day. The word that I've spoken will judge him on the last day. For I have not spoken of my own authority, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak. So there's a stunning principle. When you receive the word of God, when you read it in your devos at home, you hear it on the radio, you hear it from some janky place, whatever, it's over the loudspeaker, you hear the words. Those words have weight. And Jesus says you have a true, authentic, just responsibility to take and hold those words. And if you don't receive the words that you hear from God, you are committing a crime, not an error, but a crime by which you will be judged. And the judge is the word. There's nothing you can appeal to outside of that, which is stunningly powerful and helpful. So us as unbelievers, when we look at who Christ is, how has he proven himself? He's not primarily proven himself by making water into wine and walking on an ocean and by splitting bread. He's primarily proving himself by speaking. And he's always done that. He made the world by speaking. He upholds the world by speaking. He'll judge the world by speaking. He does everything by speaking. And so he's talking to your soul by speaking. And he says somewhere, at some deep level, you know it is true. And you will look at him face to face to deal with that someday. Either enjoy and saying, thank you for speaking to my soul, and put my faith wholeheartedly in you and I take this and trust this. Or else you're going to say, you're going to bend your knee and confess with your lips, Christ, you are Lord, just as you told me in life. Because as the kids said today, there is no second chance after death, right? So incredibly helpful principle, convicting for us, challenging towards us, because we as mostly non-Jewish people here, we don't think that possibly internal testimony of a spoken word could actually be legitimate and authentic proof. But Jesus says it is, and he says, you and I will be talking about this later. And I just would plead you without being snarky or anything, like, please go to your knees and deal with this with him. Trust him. Give up your lesser things, and trust Jesus in this. Trust him wholeheartedly. So he's already said that all men and women and children will have to come through the informed, intentional, and wholehearted leap of objective faith. I'm going to say this again, I'm going to unpack it. All men, women, and children will have to come to him through informed, intentional, and wholehearted leap of objective faith. By what do I mean by this? Objective faith means it's faith in a specific and described claim. It's not a general thing. You can have faith in anything. I can create a creature here and talk about it, and you can put your faith in that creature. But it's not a real object, right? And when a person, we have a lot of non-objective faith right now. In our culture, all ideas, our culture right now, which says only things that really matter are things that you can touch, taste, feel, and prove. We're secularists in our culture. Anything to it's all good and bad and beauty, all of that is subjective faith. There's no even reason at all at the being level of why they would say it. It's a true leap into the dark. If you think all that matters and all you can know is what you can touch, why should you say that rape is wrong, not just inconvenient? The only reason you have, at the end of the day, is you just jump into the dark, right? But you're going to jump in the dark and say it's a law. That's not an objective faith. Christ and other faiths are an objective faith. So if you listen to the Muslim world, you listen to Jehovah's Witness, you listen to Christianity, those are a defined corpus, a body of information on which you put your faith. It might be a wrong object, and it might be insufficient faith, but that's what it is. It's a jump onto something that's described. So the only way we know Jesus is by a correct, objective end to which we place our faith. So I'll say it again. Every man, woman, and child will only know him through placing informed, intentional, wholehearted leap of objective faith into Christ, into his written words and promises. That's the only way you'll ever know him. No one can know God aside from faith. And man, that really bothers me in my flesh. As a Westerner, I just want to walk that pathway of logical, empirical, testable, tasteable, touchable things right there. And maybe some testimonies of people that are 2 years older than me and have a bigger degree. I want to follow that because that's sure, but Jesus goes, that's not the way it works. I speak my truth to you. I describe it. I put it objectively in front of you, and you step wholeheartedly in faith, not half-heartedly, not with one toe still dragging back in this world. Wholeheartedly cast your faith in him. He says you can know him, but it will only be through faith, and he may possibly give you an additional proof, such as a miracle, or get another thing, getting to see the love that he creates in his family, or some type of new empirical fact, but you'll never need those. You'll never need those. You've heard his word, and it is sufficient. We can't say from the bottom of our hearts, it's not enough anymore. So there's a difference between listening and pretending, and there's a difference between seeking and stalling. So if you are outside the faith right now, and you've not put your faith in Jesus, be very careful that what you may call seeking is stalling, because he's speaking sufficiently to you. And if you're still understanding him, I would say get back to him. How do you not stall? You read again, you pray again, you think about it. Go to Jesus and deal with Jesus. That's how you can make sure you're not stalling. So Christ sets the term for sufficient revelation, and all men, women, and children are genuinely and justly accountable to it. Our second piece is this then. Beware of infectious idolatries. Beware of infectious idolatries. Take a look in verse 14. It says, now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven, which is the yeast of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. So apparently Jesus drops this little admonition nugget, lays it there, so the apostles start then talking to one another. So of course, we read some of these things the apostles do. You're like, dude, you guys are idiots. I totally wouldn't have done that. Yes, you would, and yes, I would have, right? We just would have watched the feeding of 5,000 and 4,000 and walking on the sea, and I just guarantee you, we'd be in the back of the boat. Well, did you bring the bread? I didn't bring the bread. And so Jesus is giving something here, and they misunderstand it. And we'll talk about the misunderstanding in a second here. But what is Jesus getting at? He's just left the Pharisees, right? They were on the Gentile side, then they went over to the Jewish side, they encountered the Pharisees, now they're back across the lake, putting more miles on the boat, and they just encountered them, and Jesus turns to them, using some language, some figurative language, some would say idioms, which I think idioms are awesome, and he says, hey, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Herodians. And Matthew expands it out a little bit, he says the Sadducees too. What does he mean by that? They fumbled the bread. They're looking around trying to figure out. He gives this little example, and he uses this leaven. Leaven or yeast is a metaphor in Scripture for sin often. And it particularly is there because it gives a picture about how easily and quickly it infiltrates in everything. Like yeast spreads, right? So he gives this kind of classic example. They should have tied into this one. It's a classic Old Testament one. And he's warning them about the Pharisees and the Herodians. And he's not simply warning them that they would hurt them, but he's warning to them of what their teaching is, their mindset and their teaching, and saying, watch out for the infectious influence of their teaching. So 2 things. Danger number 1, the danger of the Pharisees' error. The unbelieving Jewish religious error, having a look about them that sounds godly, religious, and biblical, but was godless and antichrist to the core. Saying, watch out for these guys and this teaching and this influence. Watch out for yourselves. Watch out for the people that I'm sending you to. Present version of this, in similar ways, looks like this. All types of supposed Christian voices, influences, and movements that advertise Jesus in the Bible but aren't truly driven by him in his heart. They got all kinds of Jesus pieces. They got all kinds of verses on the walls and stuff like that, but they're really not driven by his heart. And in the end, the danger of them is that they replace, right? They replace the Spirit with emotionalism. They replace spiritual power with systems or personalities. They upset the primary order of loves that Christ has given, love God, love his family, love his world, and replace it with something that seems reasonable, making people care for or more identified with the lost and his family. Rather than giving strong spiritual medicine of truth, they pitch man-made sayings and principles. They nullify the purpose and effect of our earthly lives to make our best life now rather than later with him. Those are all things every day you can find on the internet hanging out in the scope of Christianity. And it is the leaven of the Pharisees, our version of it. And it's infectious. It is a danger to you, and it's a danger to every soul that's around you. Likewise, the second danger was the danger of the Herodians. The Herodians were Jewish folks who were pragmatists. Let's just keep our Judaism anyway it is, and let's ditch the hopes of David's kingship in his line, and we'll just take the Herodian line. They're not very good, they're shady, but we'll just take those guys. They were just get her done, folks. And he says, watch out for them. They were driven by earthly and temporal pragmatism, as long as it works. And we see it presently in a lot of influences we have. Hiding behind Christianity, things that just human systems and things that work. We see it a lot right now around us too, like influences trying to pull us into political parties to do what just needs to be done. Infectious idolatry flowing from our culture to come to our senses and agree to the true deeper needs, the true deeper commonality, all of us in our nation, replacing Christianity with Americanism, reasonableism, scientism, Trumpism, Obamaism, Reaganism, etc. Right? There's 1,000 different ones. Teams that are recruiting you to the true and better to get it done. We just got to do, we got to do. And honestly, the more we follow Jesus in some ways into acting out in our faith and speaking against sin and injustice and those kind of things, the more we enter an arena where we especially be careful, because when you take those steps out there, now you are even more vulnerable. Now is when you really don't relax. Now is the time when you really don't just double down. When you go outside the gates and you follow the Lord in gospel living and you say, no or yes, or we should do this or we shouldn't do this, you immediately turn back around and run back inside the gospel gates and get your head clear again. Don't just sit up there holding your breath, figuring out what to do, because you're going to become something other than Christian if you're out there too long. So especially be careful as you step out in faith into gospel living, because we can't hoard our gospel living up and not let it spill into life. It has to go into life, but when it does go into life, you are outside the walls. Be very, very careful. So we see these two dangers time and time again in the scriptures, but how do we fight against it? You fight against it in kind of the most beautiful, simple way. Up here, Colossians 2, 6-7, you're gospel fluent, you're gospel centered. That's how you fight against it. How do you watch against the Pharisees? How do you watch against the Herodians? You know what the truth is and you love it, and you come back to it. You come back inside the walls and you think this way. Consider this, Colossians 2, 6-9. Therefore, as you receive Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ, for in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. So that's why Cross City, we are going to go gospel-centered. We're going to speak the gospel every Sunday. Everyone that comes in here and says they want to be a part, we're going to say, can we spend a little time talking to you about the gospel? And then we're going to say, would you please give us a Saturday, just one Saturday at least, where you'll spend 8 hours with us at the lake house and we can do our gospel workshop with you. Because we want you to not only know the gospel backwards and forwards, but we want you to know how everything connects to the gospel so that you can not only speak it, but even more than speak it, so you can live it. You can live the gospel life, and you're defended from these infectious diseases that are around you all the time because you are strong in the core thing. It is not as if you have to memorize all 2,000 pages of Scripture to be defended from the infectious effects of error. Know the gospel, know it inside and out, and we are here to do our best to help you with that. And that's why you will keep getting a text message from me if you haven't responded to that in 4 years. We want you to know the gospel inside and out, and we really want you to be safe. And what's really important, on the other side of you are generations of people that you are sent to, and they need to know the gospel thoroughly, and they need to know how to teach the next people how to do that. So we're just want to drill and kill it with you guys together, so we are truly gospel-centered, and if that's the case, we will be safe. As gospel people, the King tells us to watch out for and defend ourselves from others from godlessness posing as genuine religious faith or subtle pragmatism. Watch out for the danger of infectious error by being gospel-centered personally and gospel-centered as a church, now and always. Our final piece is this, and it is brief. Hardness of heart is self-cloaking. I guess you have to look over there. Hardness of heart is self-cloaking. Look at verse 16. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Right? Jesus drops his teaching moment. They're like, where's the bread? It says there was one loaf of bread. I'm saying it probably belonged to Judas because he never missed an opportunity to profit. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, what are you discussing? So why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember? Those are strong rebuking languages. It ties into some of the things he said they've heard him say to the false leaders of Israel, right? So that, when you hear those words about having ears that don't hear, they know they're getting a very stiff Jesus whooping in the boat. And he says, verse 19, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said, 7. And he said to them, do you not understand? Don't you get it? I'm not worried about bread. Don't you get it? I'm not worried about bread. But he calls them out for their hardness of heart, rebukes them, this time with great strength. Jesus loves these men, but he is displeased, openly displeased by them right now. They're grieving his heart, and he's openly confronting him. So my question for you, brothers and sisters in the room, is from verse 17. Why are you discussing the fact that you don't have bread? Do you not yet perceive or understanding, and are your hearts hardened? Like, Jesus didn't give them a warning that a lesson's coming. Sometimes you say, hear this, or listen to this. And everyone should be like, okay, Jesus is going to talk and teach. But here, Jesus just kind of slides it in from the front of the boat, kind of something he says across kind of briefly. And he's expecting them to be on their toes and listening to what he's saying, because he's not really caught up in bread and he's really not caught up in boats. But their hearts were hard, and that's why they just went back to bread. And I just want to challenge you guys as my brothers and sisters, not because I think anybody here is hard, but I'd be really dumb to think that like half of us aren't wrestling with some real hard-heartedness. Like, is your heart hard? Are you actively training your ears to hear, to be on tune for, to be in tune with, to be on the lookout for what is Christ teaching you? What is the Spirit leading you into? What is He convicting you of? Are you hardened possibly to vast sin, stubbornness, just the way I am? That's just my personality. That's just my Enneagram number. Like, are these things, have you locked those in and made those like unmutable truths because your heart is hard? Or is your heart soft and your ears open to listening to what Jesus says? Guys, so many of the problems that we will ever face and you'll ever face in our church and the next church and the next church is this: hearts of Jesus people that aren't soft and ears that aren't tuned and seeking the direction of the Lord. We're not ready for when God occasionally speaks and leads. We're seeking the fact that He's always speaking and leading. And we want to be in tune with that and do not want to be hardened towards it. So God's called us to that. Your test number 1 is your reactivity to it when He speaks. Test number 2 is your pursuit of it. Not only how soft is your ear to it, but then number 2, how do you seek it all the time? So often we are thinking people just don't get it. And this is me, but let me just put me in your head right now, because I think we're a lot alike. So often I'm thinking they just don't get it, or it's more complicated than that. Even when I'm around people that really get it, they know the Lord, they're strong. And the reality is that I just don't really get it. They do. And the complication is my hardness of heart and the inability to have ears to listen. I can't rest back in the Lord and rest back in the counsel of His saints and go, okay, what do I need to hear? And let me take this gently before the Lord and trust Him. Christ expects His followers to be actively seeking His instruction, correction, and guidance in season and out. So this little passage here, these 21 verses in Mark, it's an introduction, really closing up an idea of how much God genuinely loves us Gentiles. It's then a brutal picture of the fact that He was done trying to communicate with the Pharisees in this way. He denies them a sign. He has effectively spoken to them, which is very helpful for us because we know how He has effectively spoken to us. And we don't need another sign. Back in the day, 1980s, I'm in my bedroom in Palmdale, California, and I'm wrestling with, like, Jesus, are you real? And so I sat there on my waterbed, not a baffled one for you old people, like the full gushy one, right? And I'm sitting in my waterbed, and I had a chair and had wheels on it. And I was like, God, I just want to know if you're there. I want to know if you're true. Like, would you just move that chair? It's even got wheels on it, so it wouldn't be hard. You could just like nudge it one way or another. I had a lot of those conversations with the Lord. And then He, by His Spirit, just kept me coming back to read His Word and read His Word and read His Word. And I, as a high schooler, I couldn't put in these words now, but I, as a high schooler, became very aware that He is saying stuff and He expects us to listen when He says it, and it counts. And He says He's a perfect judge and we're accountable to it. And so I, as a high schooler, never got my chair moved with the wheelie things. He never did that to me, but He very sufficiently did prove Himself to me. Praise God, and pulled my heart to Him. And so our final piece is this. Brothers and sisters, let's not do the dumb kingdom hard heart things. Like, let us not deal with God only when He absolutely nearly breaks our boat apart. But let us have our hearts tuned towards Him, seeking Him, listening to what He says, so we actually encounter Him and react to Him well when He does interject in our world, and that we are way beyond that, actively seeking His heart and His mind. All right? Well, at this time, we're going to finish our service with 2 songs. We're going to celebrate communion. If you know Jesus, even if you just came to know Him, we'd encourage you during the first song especially, there'll be 2 halves to it. Just go back there and jump into a circle where we celebrate that Jesus did die for us. And by taking that, you're saying, I personally believe that Christ has done that. He's paid for my sins. He's brought us the new covenant. It's in effect. So if you're a believer, feel free to join us in the first or second half of the first song, and then we'll finish out in our singing together.